He was humiliated, underestimated, and pushed to his limits. But when opportunity knocks, will Eddie seize it or let revenge consume him? Watch how one young mechanic turns the tables on his tormentors in a heart-pounding tale of redemption and resilience. The garage was alive with the hum of tools and the sharp tang of motor oil. Eddie leaned over the hood of an Aston Martin Vantage, his fingers deftly maneuvering a wrench as he tightened the last bolt on the engine block. At 18, he already had a reputation for fixing cars that others deemed beyond repair. But today, his skill wasn't enough to shield him from the storm brewing around him. A group of wealthy teenagers lounged near the workbench, their laughter cutting through the air like jagged glass. They were the kind of people who walked into a room and expected it to bend to their will, their presence both commanding and suffocating. Leading them was Tristan Phillips, a young man whose arrogance was as polished as the silver watch on his wrist. His smirk could curdle milk, and his words carried the weight of someone who had never been told no. "This piece of junk still doesn't purr right," Tristan sneered, tossing a crumpled bill onto the workbench. It landed with a soft slap, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "Guess you're not worth your weight in grease." Eddie's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He couldn't. Beneath his stained coveralls and grease-streaked hands lay a secret he guarded fiercely. Donovan Keaton, owner of Keaton Motors, one of the largest luxury engine manufacturers in the country, was his father. Yet here Eddie stood, wrench in hand, proving himself from the ground up because his father insisted he earn his place without privilege. "Donovan sent you here to scrub toilets?" Tristan continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Or are you just running errands for the big man?" Eddie's grip on the wrench tightened, his knuckles whitening. He wanted to snap back, to tell Tristan exactly who he was and watch the smugness drain from his face. But he didn't. Instead, he focused on the car in front of him, letting the rhythm of his work drown out the noise around him. The Aston Martin wasn't just a machine, it was a puzzle, and Eddie lived for solving puzzles. Later that afternoon, the garage door rolled open, and a sleek Rolls-Royce Phantom glided in like a ghost. Its engine groaned under mysterious strain, something even Henry Denver, Eddie's gruff boss, hesitated to tackle. Paul Graham, the car's owner, stepped out with an air of quiet authority. He was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a demeanor that suggested he didn't waste time on small talk. "Take this one, kid," Henry barked, thrusting the keys into Eddie's palm. "Don't screw it up." Eddie examined the Rolls-Royce with meticulous attention. His experience allowed him to pick up on nuances that others might overlook. As he inspected the fuel injection system, he noticed faint but deliberate signs of tampering. Someone had sabotaged the mechanism on purpose. This wasn't just a random malfunction, Eddie thought, frowning as he turned a valve between his fingers. Someone did this intentionally. The discovery unsettled him. Whoever was behind this car clearly had the resources to afford expensive maintenance, but they also seemed entangled in something far more complex. Something that went beyond the usual luxury and status associated with owners of vehicles like this. Eddie kept his suspicions to himself, deciding to focus on fixing the problem before jumping to any conclusions. For hours, Eddie worked in silence, dismantling and reassembling parts with meticulous precision. When Paul returned the next day, Eddie unveiled his solution. A custom bypass valve that improved performance beyond factory specifications. Paul raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You've got talent," Paul remarked, lighting a cigarette. "Gary Leroy would love to meet someone like you." Gary Leroy, a name synonymous with speed and precision in racing circles. The mention sent a shiver down Eddie's spine. Could this be his chance to step out of the shadows? But before Eddie could dwell on the possibility, Tristan and his crew returned to the garage. Their laughter echoed once more, louder and more obnoxious than before. Tristan leaned against the workbench, his gaze lingering on Eddie with thinly veiled disdain. "Still playing mechanic, huh?" Tristan drawled. "You know, if you ever want to upgrade your life, I could put in a good word for you. Maybe you'd make a decent valet." Eddie's hands stilled for a moment, but he forced himself to breathe deeply. He reminded himself of what Paul had said earlier. Rust destroys metal, Hatred destroys the soul. Hate would only drag him deeper into the mire. Instead, he turned his attention back to the Rolls-Royce, letting the satisfaction of his work speak for itself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows across the garage floor, Eddie just worked and thought that he may have been surrounded by arrogance and ridicule, but he knew that one day he would prove to anyone who doubted him that he belonged there. Little did Eddie know, Donovan watched silently from afar, using Paul as his eyes and ears. Pride flickered in Donovan's gaze, though he remained distant, waiting for Eddie to rise on his own merits. Eddie wiped his hands on a grease-stained rag, the faint hum of satisfaction buzzing in his chest. Fixing the Rolls-Royce had been more than just another job. It was proof that he could solve problems others couldn't even diagnose. Paul Graham's words from the day before lingered in his mind. The idea of working with Gary Leroy sparked something deep within him, a flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished. But hope wasn't enough to shield him from the relentless tide of arrogance that swept into the garage every time Tristan and his crew arrived. They were back again this morning, their laughter bouncing off the walls like an unwelcome echo. Eddie ignored them as best he could, focusing instead on the stack of repair orders Henry had dropped on his workbench earlier. Still, he couldn't help but notice when Tristan sauntered over to the Rolls-Royce, running a finger along its gleaming surface. "Not bad for a glorified grease monkey," Tristan remarked, his tone dripping with condescension. Eddie clenched his jaw but didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he turned his attention to the next car in line, a battered old BMW with a seized engine. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and that mattered more to him than anything Tristan could say. As the day wore on, Eddie found himself wrestling with a particularly stubborn issue in the BMW's transmission. He spent hours poring over diagrams and manuals, trying to pinpoint the source of the problem. Just when frustration began to creep in, inspiration struck. Using spare parts scavenged from other vehicles, Eddie improvised a solution that not only fixed the issue but improved the car's overall performance. When the owner came to pick it up later that afternoon, he was visibly impressed. "You've got a gift," the man said, shaking Eddie's hand firmly. "If I ever need work done again, I'm coming straight to you." The compliment buoyed Eddie's spirits, but it was short-lived. Tristan's voice cut through the air moments later, sharp and biting. "Don't get too full of yourself, kid. A few lucky fixes don't make you special." Eddie swallowed the retort that rose to his lips. He knew better than to let Tristan see how much his words affected him. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, channeling his frustration into his work. By the end of the day, he had repaired 2 more cars, each one leaving the garage in better condition than when it arrived. That evening, after the garage had emptied and the last tool was put away, Paul Graham returned unexpectedly, saying he went looking for a rare type of engine oil. He carried a small leather notebook under his arm, flipping through its pages as he approached Eddie. "I've been meaning to ask," Paul began, lighting another cigarette. "How long have you been working here?" "About 6 months," Eddie replied, leaning against the workbench. "Why?" Paul exhaled a plume of smoke, studying Eddie with keen interest. "You remind me of someone. Gary Leroy, actually. Same knack for solving problems no one else can touch." Eddie felt a surge of pride at the comparison, though he tried not to show it. "I wouldn't know about that," he said modestly. "I just do what needs to be done." Paul chuckled. "Modesty suits you, but don't sell yourself short. Talent like yours deserves recognition." Eddie allowed himself to smile. The weight of Tristan's taunts and the constant pressure to prove himself seemed to lift, if only for a moment. But as quickly as the feeling came, it faded. Reality crept back in, reminding him of the challenges ahead and the secrets he still kept hidden. Across town, Donovan Keaton sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a report from Paul in the other. He read the details of Eddie's recent accomplishments, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Pride swelled in his chest, though he kept it carefully guarded. And so, while Eddie dreamed of engines and speed, unaware of the forces aligning behind him, the stage was set for a collision of ambition, rivalry, and redemption. The Keystone Grand Prix loomed on the horizon, its promise of speed and prestige casting a shadow over everything else. Eddie had spent days processing Paul's offer, weighing the risks and rewards of stepping into a world he'd only ever dreamed about. But when Gary Leroy himself appeared at the garage one evening, there was no more room for hesitation. "Eddie," Gary said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Paul tells me you're the real deal. I need someone like you on my team." Eddie blinked, caught off guard by the suddenness of it all. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Gary replied, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "We've got a car that needs your touch. A Nissan GTR. We're prepping for the race. It's fast, but it's not perfect. Yet." Eddie felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. This was his chance to prove himself, not just as a mechanic, but as someone who belonged in the elite world of racing. He nodded, his decision made. "All right, I'm in." Gary clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. Meet me at the warehouse tonight. We start at midnight." That night, Eddie found himself standing in a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of town. The air buzzed with anticipation as mechanics scurried around, tools clinking and engines roaring to life. In the center of it all sat the Nissan GTR, its sleek lines gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was a masterpiece of engineering, but Gary was right. It wasn't finished yet. Donovan arrived shortly after Eddie, slipping into the warehouse with the quiet confidence of a man who owned the room without needing to announce it. He exchanged a few words with Gary before turning his attention to Eddie. "You ready for this?" Donovan asked, his tone measured but laced with pride. Eddie hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think so." Donovan studied him for a moment, then gestured toward the car. "Show them why you belong here." With those words, Eddie dove into the work. For hours, he and the team pored over every inch of the GTR, fine-tuning the engine, adjusting the suspension, and testing modifications that pushed the limits of what the car could do. Each adjustment brought them closer to perfection, each tweak a step closer to victory. As the days passed, the tension between Eddie and Tristan grew palpable. Tristan continued to mock Eddie whenever their paths crossed, oblivious to the fact that Eddie was preparing to enter the same race he bragged about dominating. One afternoon, while Eddie worked on a routine repair at the garage, Tristan strolled in with his usual entourage. "Still fixing junkers, huh?" Tristan sneered, leaning against a nearby workbench. "You should come watch the race. Maybe you'll learn something." Eddie forced a tight smile, keeping his focus on the task at hand. "I'll keep that in mind." Tristan didn't notice the flicker of determination in Eddie's eyes, or the way his hands moved with purpose, fueled by the knowledge that he was about to turn the tables in ways Tristan couldn't imagine. Meanwhile, Gary and Donovan worked closely with Eddie, leading up to the race. They spent weeks remembering Eddie's old teenage routine when he developed a passion for motors, and he has carried it since that time. Eddie studied hard and his talent grew. They tested the GTR on deserted roads late at night, its engine roaring like a beast unleashed. Eddie marveled at how the car responded to his adjustments, each run smoother and faster than the last. But it wasn't just the car that was evolving, Eddie was too. With every test drive, he felt more confident behind the wheel, his instincts sharpening as he learned to anticipate the nuances of high-speed racing. Gary noticed this transformation and began incorporating driving drills into their sessions, pushing Eddie to hone his skills further. "You've got natural talent," Gary remarked one evening after a particularly impressive lap. "But talent alone won't win races. You've got to outthink your opponents." Eddie absorbed the advice, knowing it applied not just to racing but to life itself. He thought about Tristan, the arrogance, the entitlement, and realized that beating him wouldn't just be about crossing the finish line first. It would be about proving that true strength came from hard work and integrity, not wealth or status. As the final days before the race ticked away, whispers began to circulate about a mysterious new driver training with Gary Leroy. Some speculated it was a seasoned professional flying under the radar. Others dismissed it as idle gossip. Even Tristan's crew started to take notice, though they remained convinced that no one could match their leader's skill. One evening, During a covert test run, Eddie encountered one of Tristan's mechanics at a gas station. The man recognized Eddie immediately, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What are you doing out here?" the mechanic demanded, his tone accusatory. Eddie shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Just taking a drive." The mechanic didn't look convinced, but before he could press further, Eddie slid back into the GTR and sped off into the night. The encounter left him uneasy, a reminder that secrets were fragile things, and that Tristan wouldn't hesitate to exploit any weakness he found. By the time the sun rose on the morning of the race, Eddie was ready. The GTR gleamed in the early light, its engine purring like a contented predator. As he stood beside it, helmet in hand, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. This wasn't just about winning. Across the track, Tristan strutted confidently beside his Lamborghini Huracan, surrounded by admirers eager to bask in his reflected glory. He had no idea that the boy he'd mocked for months was about to challenge everything he believed in. And so, as the engines roared to life and the starting signal blared, the stage was set for a showdown that would leave no one unchanged. The morning of the Keystone Grand Prix dawned crisp and electric, the air thick with anticipation. Eddie stood in the pit area, his helmet cradled under one arm as he surveyed the bustling scene around him. Mechanics scrambled to make last-minute adjustments, drivers paced nervously, and spectators filled the stands, their excitement palpable. But amidst the chaos, Eddie felt an unusual calm. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, pouring his heart and soul into the Nissan GTR that now rested gleaming beside him. Gary Leroy approached, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp with purpose. "You ready?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. Eddie nodded, gripping the helmet tighter. "As ready as I'll ever be." Gary hesitated for a moment, then placed a hand on Eddie's shoulder. "There's something you should know. This race isn't just about proving yourself. It's about showing the world who you are. Drive like you mean it." Before Eddie could respond, Donovan appeared, his presence commanding yet oddly comforting. For once, there was no distance between them, no pretense or guardedness. Just a father watching his son step onto the stage he'd been born to claim. "You've earned this," Donovan said simply. "Now go show them what you're made of." Eddie swallowed hard, the weight of those words settling deep within him. He slipped on his helmet and climbed into the GTR, its familiar hum vibrating through the seat beneath him. As he adjusted the mirrors and gripped the steering wheel, he allowed himself one final moment of reflection. This wasn't just about beating Tristan. It was about breaking free from the shadows that had defined him for so long. The starting signal blared, and the world erupted into motion. Tires screeched, engines roared, and the pack surged forward like a living beast. Eddie pushed the GTR hard, its power unleashed as he weaved through the initial chaos. Within moments, he found himself neck and neck with Tristan's Lamborghini Huracan, the two cars locked in a high-speed duel. Tristan glanced over, his expression a mixture of surprise and fury. He hadn't expected Eddie to be anywhere near him, let alone challenging for the lead. The arrogance that had always fueled Tristan now worked against him, causing him to take unnecessary risks. For several laps, they traded positions, each trying to outmaneuver the other. But Eddie remained calm, his focus unshakable. He remembered Gary's advices. On the 7th lap, Tristan pushed his car too hard, the Lamborghini's engine straining under the pressure. Smoke began to billow from the rear, and within seconds, the car sputtered to a halt, victim to overheating caused by poorly executed modifications. As Tristan climbed out, his face red with rage, Eddie resisted the urge to gloat. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, knowing the race wasn't over yet. But even as he pulled further ahead, Eddie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. During a quick pit stop midway through the race, one of the mechanics noticed faint traces of tampering in the GTR's fuel system. A deliberate attempt to sabotage the car. Someone had tried to ensure Eddie wouldn't finish the race. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing," the mechanic muttered, shaking his head. "Good thing you spotted it before it became a problem." Eddie clenched his jaw, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just competition. It was personal. Someone wanted him to fail, and badly. But instead of letting anger consume him, Eddie channeled it into determination. He had come too far to let anyone or anything stand in his way. With renewed resolve, Eddie returned to the track, pushing the GTR to its limits. The car responded beautifully, its engine roaring with precision as he navigated every curve and straightaway with flawless control. By the final lap, he was firmly in the lead, leaving the rest of the field far behind. Crossing the finish line victorious, Eddie felt a rush of exhilaration unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The crowd erupted into cheers, and mechanics swarmed the pit area, congratulating him on an incredible win. But as he stepped onto the podium, microphone in hand, he knew this moment was about more than just triumph. During the race, he began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. I discovered sabotage in my car, but I fixed it, because integrity matters more than winning dirty. Hard work is my legacy, not my name. The audience fell silent, stunned by the revelation. Even Tristan, standing nearby with his arms crossed, looked momentarily taken aback. Eddie continued, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. I didn't come here to prove I'm better than anyone else. I came here to prove that talent and dedication can overcome arrogance and privilege. And if you think I'm done, you're wrong. His words hung in the air, a challenge to anyone who doubted him. When the applause finally broke out, it was deafening, echoing across the track like thunder. After the ceremony, Eddie returned to the garage where his journey had begun. Despite his victory, he chose to stay grounded, refusing to let success inflate his ego. To him, greatness wasn't about titles or trophies. It was about proving yourself every single day. Donovan watched from a distance, pride shining in his eyes. For the first time, he saw his son not just as a mechanic or a racer, but as someone who embodied everything the Keaton name stood for: resilience, innovation, and unwavering commitment. And as Eddie tightened the last bolt on a customer's car later that evening, he smiled to himself. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but he was ready. After all, the true test of a legacy wasn't in how you started, it was in how you kept moving forward. In a world obsessed with power and prestige, Eddie reminds us that true strength lies in staying true to ourselves. Would you have taken the same path? Share your thoughts below. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Embrace the Journey for more unforgettable tales.